could just listen to that all day. That was Yehuda Green channeling Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? And a good Erev Shabbos to you. Shabbos is almost here. We're so excited. Let's light up the darkness. The wisdom candle is pretty low this week. That means I've been gabbing a lot. Long classes all week. How are you? Who is tuning in? Yehudit says, Shabbat Shalom, wishing Nina, Sal, and everyone a restful and rejuvenating Shabbos from Florence, South Carolina. Pauline with us from Arkansas, Chaim in Charlotte, Christo in Lubbock. Joyce says, good Shabbos, Rabbi. Sarah from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. James says, Shabbat Shalom in Indianapolis. Jill with us from Willamette, Illinois. Delana says, Shalom. Marjorie is wishing us a good Shabbos from Georgia. Christo is reminding, and thank you, Christo, I'm not a rabbi. That is definitely true. I am not a rabbi. I'm just one Jew, excited about what I've learned and sharing a little bit to the best of my ability. That makes me an accidental Talmudist and you an accidental Talmudist. If you learn something that is of value in your life, share it with someone else. Sheila from Montana. Tom says, good Shabbos, everybody. Nancy in North Carolina. Patrice in Utah. Well, where am I? Jim in Newport, New Hampshire. Stop it, Facebook. It keeps skipping on me. Paul in Minneapolis. Randy in Florida. Paul in Chicago. Chana Rivka says a good Chodesh. It's a new month of Shvat. And Keith Sullivan from Woburn, Massachusetts. Over there on the YouTube side, Charles is with us from San Antonio. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be bringing in Shabbos with you, just a few hours away here in LA. We have two dedications today of today's class. Joshua Silver, our good friend here in LA, is dedicating today's class in honor of my pals, Sal and Nina. Thank you so much, Josh, and may you and your beautiful family be showered in blessings, and we say amen. And also, Deanna Ernst is dedicating today's class in memory of Sven Skarnstein, of blessed memory, my service dog who passed away on November 16th. I know people form very tight bonds with any pet, but a service dog, of course, is a different kind of relationship altogether. It must be a terrific loss, a great, great loss for you, Deanna. May you be comforted. I imagine if you needed a service dog once, you'll need another. May you form the same kind of bond with your next service dog, and may he be a blessing in your life, and may you and all your family and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. We're very grateful to you and to Josh for dedicating a day of learning here at Accidental Talmudist. If you're interested in dedicating a day of learning to the honor or the memory or the healing of a loved one, you can do so at our website at accidentaltalmudist.org. Just follow the donate button and it'll explain how to do it. Okay. We've got some very interesting teachings today, and I'm going to try to keep it efficient as I see the wisdom candle is so low, and then I've just been a little bit too long-winded all week. I apologize for that. The classes should stay under an hour, and better if it's 45 minutes, right? And a couple of them went long this week. Okay, so where are we holding? Today's daf is daf Nun Hey, page 55, here in Tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. We're in chapter 4, and today we're actually going to open and complete our discussion of 3 Mishnas, the 4th, 5th, and 6th Mishnas here in chapter 4. This chapter is largely concerned with custom, right? So there's Torah laws, there's rabbinic decrees, basically a fence around the Torah to protect us from coming to violate biblical laws. And there are local customs that vary from one Jewish community to another. Pardon me. Okay. And basically the rabbis have told us that we respect local customs, and over time they acquire the force of law in those communities. And the basic principle is if you travel and you're visiting a community that has a different custom than your own, you respect the local custom. I mean, it certainly accords with common sense. But we take the law very seriously. We take the rabbinic decrees very seriously. So when it's certainly worth noting how we're going to navigate these differences, where one community has a custom that they understand to be in accordance, not just with what's right and proper, but even with rabbinic decree, and then somebody has a different practice in another community. It can lead to confusion. And so that's why the rabbis are going to be specific about how to navigate certain differences, and also to identify, is it really caused by a difference in local custom, or was there a misunderstanding at some point of a rabbinic decree, or even, God forbid, a Torah law? So that's the general topic that we're addressing. All right, here we go. We're actually beginning on page 54b, the B side, with the fourth Mishnah of chapter 4. The Mishnah continues the previous discussion of customs. So in a place where people were accustomed to perform labor on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, which commemorates the destruction of the temple, right? The temple, both temples actually, the first and second temples were destroyed on the 9th of Av, a summer month. One performs labor. So so we have a fast, a very stringent fast, almost the same kind of a fast as we have on Yom Kippur, a full 25-hour fast. It is not a holiday. It is not a Torah holiday. Obviously, it came about much later as a rabbinic decree because the temple was destroyed on that day, and we mourn the loss of the temple, particularly the second temple, because it has not been rebuilt since. 2,000 years we're waiting for the temple to be rebuilt. So it's a day of mourning. The question is it going to be a day of rest like a festival, or even Yom Kippur, which is not the same as a festival, but certainly no work is performed. It's actually considered like a Shabbat of Shabbats, or Rosh Hashanah. I mean, these other days where labor is prohibited, right? So this is a fast day decreed by the rabbis. Is labor going to be prohibited? Labor is not prohibited on Hanukkah and Purim, which were days which were initiated, that's the word I was looking for, which were initiated later. They're not Torah holidays, although we make a blessing as if God commanded us to observe those days, because we understand that the elders of a generation were appointed by God to have that power to institute a holiday. And we do, but it's not a day of rest. So now we're learning that some communities treated Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, this day of mourning for the destruction of the temple, also as a day of rest from work, and other communities don't have that practice, right? So here the Mishnah is addressing this issue. So in a place where people are accustomed to perform labor on Tisha B'Av, one performs labor. In a place where people were accustomed not to perform labor, one does not perform labor. And in all places, Torah scholars are idle and do not perform labor on the 9th of Av due to the mourning over the temple's destruction. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, with regard to the 9th of Av, a person should always conduct himself as a Torah scholar and refrain from performing labor. So we'll come back in a moment to where the law ended up, but let's see how the discussion of this Mishnah goes in the Gemara. Shmuel said, the only communal fast. Now, communal fasts are something else. Tisha B'Av is a fast instituted by the sages. We certainly observe it every year. It is a major fast that comes usually in August. A communal fast was something different. We have other fast days that are actually also related to the destruction of the temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, like when the siege began. I think that's 17 Tammuz. and a couple of others like that, sort of like milestone dates in the siege of Jerusalem, and then when the walls were breached, and then the destruction. We also have the fast of Gedaliah, which is the day after Rosh Hashanah. But there were also communal fasts, right? So in a very these were all agricultural societies 2,000 years ago. And when there was a drought, a severe drought, and rain wasn't coming, and so the whole community was very much imperiled by the drought, the rabbis, the leaders of the community, would institute communal fast days. And so there would be these communal fasts, and there would be different rules about them, and sort of like the longer the drought went on, the more stringent those communal fasts became. Shmuel said that the only communal fast in Babylonia during which all the stringencies of a communal fast are observed is the 9th of Av. Right? So there would be a difference between communal fasts observed in the land of Israel, in the land of Babylonia, and in other lands where there were Jewish communities. The Gemara asks, is that to say, based on the parallel that he drew between them, that Shmuel, the sage Shmuel, holds that the 9th of Av is as stringent as communal fast days, in that during twilight on the 9th of Av, all activities prohibited on the 9th of Av are prohibited? Right, so we're asking, well, just how stringent is the fast of the 9th of Av? First, we have this question, are we going to work or not? The Mishna says that's subject to local custom. But another question that comes up is when we look at Shabbos, right? Twilight is a period of doubt. We're not sure exactly when Shabbos begins. So we basically observe that it's Shabbos and we refrain from work not for 24 hours, but for 25 hours, because we include all of the twilight period on Friday evening and on Saturday evening within Shabbos, just in case, because we're not... reasonably speaking, any day is 24 hours long. So refraining from work, or if it's a fast day, the fast should only be 24 hours long. But because we have a doubt about the twilight period, if we're going to be stringent, we're going to include the whole twilight period on both ends, and that would make the day of rest or the day of fasting more than 24 hours. It'd be 25 hours, even and a little bit more. So are we going to include those twilight periods in the fast of the 9th of Av? And a different question, if that community doesn't work on that day, is that also going to be included? But Shmuel didn't say during twilight of the 9th of Av, all activities prohibited on the 9th of Av are permitted, and the sages did not decree any prohibitions during this time. And if you say that Shmuel holds, well, with regard to every communal fast, during twilight, those activities considered to be afflictions are permitted, right? So afflictions, as we mentioned a little bit yesterday, in terms of Yom Kippur, it's not just that we don't eat, we don't bathe, we don't anoint ourselves, we don't wear leather shoes, we don't have marital relations. So are all those activities which are considered to be the afflictions of the day of affliction, are they going to be prohibited during the twilight periods? Yes, for Yom Kippur, for sure. Why? Because it's a biblical holiday. The 9th of Av, which is by rabbinic decree, we have the general principle that with respect to Torah laws, where there's a doubt, we're going to be stringent. With respect to rabbinic decrees, where there's a case of doubt, does it apply in this situation or not, we're going to be lenient, because the rabbis are very conscious of the fact that they don't want to become legislators who just legislate and legislate and legislate, building a fence around the Torah and a fence around the fence and a fence around the fence. They don't do that, right? They don't multiply their decrees on the same questions. And so therefore, when there's a case of doubt, they're going to be lenient. Okay, where am I? And if you say that Shmuel holds, with regard to every communal fast, during twilight, those activities considered to be afflictions are permitted, well, didn't we learn in a Mishnah, with respect to a public fast day, one may eat and drink while it is still day? And the Gemara analyzes this statement. What does the expression, while it is still day, come to include? What? Isn't it to exclude the twilight of a communal fast day when these activities are prohibited? And the Gemara, in other words, you could eat before that fast day begins if it's an entire 25-hour fast. The minor fast days, the fast doesn't begin the night before. It's only during daylight on the fast day itself. But on a major fast, it begins the night before. Now, if you say that it begins the night before, does it begin as soon as twilight begins, or does it begin when it's dark, right? And with respect to Yom Kippur, for sure, it begins when twilight begins. With respect to other lesser fast days, no. What about the 9th of Av? That's what we're talking about right now. The 9th of Av is such a heavy day that we do have a 25-hour fast on on Tisha B'Av. But what about these other activities like working? There's room for having some differences between that and whether we eat or not. Where am I? Okay, so what does the expression "while it is still day" come to exclude? Isn't it to exclude twilight of a communal fast day when these activities are prohibited? And the Gemara rejects this and says, no, it is to exclude the time after dark when these afflictions are certainly in effect. The Gemara suggests, let us say that this Baraisa, which we're going to bring, supports Shmuel's opinion that the only difference between Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, and Yom Kippur is that with regard to this, Yom Kippur, its uncertainty is prohibited, as eating and drinking on Yom Kippur is prohibited by Torah law. Whereas with regard to that, the 9th of Av, its uncertainty is permitted, as the afflictions of the 9th of Av are rabbinic decrees. The Gemara explains the support for Shmuel's opinion. What is the meaning of the expression, with regard to that, the 9th of Av, its uncertainty is permitted? Is it not referring to twilight, with regard to which there is uncertainty whether it is day or night? So is that the uncertainty that we're talking about? During twilight, we're not sure if that day has begun or not. The Gemara rejects this. No, actually, it's not about the uncertainty of whether the day has begun or not because it's twilight. Rather, it is as Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, said in a different context. It is referring to uncertainty with regard to the determination of the first day of the month, which would require observance of the festival for 2 days. Here, too, the Baraisa referring to uncertainty with regard to determination of the first day of the new month. In other words, right, one kind of uncertainty is, has the day begun in terms of separating from the previous day? At what time exactly does a new day begin? At the beginning of twilight, in the midst of twilight, at the end of twilight? But a different kind of uncertainty is in ancient times when the calendar was not set in advance, and a new month would only begin when the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem would declare that the new month has begun. That led to, in the diaspora outside of Israel, that festivals like the first day of Passover would be outside of Israel, would be observed for 2 days. Rosh Hashanah would be observed for 2 days, and eventually that became observed even in Israel for various reasons. But also the first day of Sukkot became a 2-day holiday, and the first day of Shavuos itself became a 2-day holiday. Also the holiday at the end of Passover, 7th and 8th day are observed, etc. And it's because they couldn't be sure, they didn't get the word quickly enough outside of Israel when the new month had begun. But those are biblical holidays. So when we talk about it's not a festival, but a day of mourning, but still commemorating a historical event like the 9th of Av, since it could have been thought that outside of the land of Israel, it would be a 2-day fast. That would really be crazy. But the sages said, no, it's not a biblical holiday, and we only observe it for 1 day. And so you might have thought that the uncertainty is, should we observe it as a 2-day fast? And the answer is no. Now, Rava taught pregnant women and nursing women fast and complete the fast on the 9th of Av in the manner that they fast and complete the fast on Yom Kippur. And during twilight, on the 9th of Av, it is prohibited to eat or drink. And they likewise said so in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, The Gemara asks, did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that? So he's bringing 2 points here in terms of pregnant women and nursing women. So they have an excuse. They don't have to complete the whole fast day of Yom Kippur if they become uncomfortable. They should try, but if it's difficult for them, I actually should have researched this. Oh, here we go. The halacha of pregnant women and nursing women is that they are required to complete the fast on the 9th of Av, just as they are on Yom Kippur, in accordance with the opinion of Rava. However, if a pregnant or nursing woman is sick and needs to eat, she's not only permitted to do so, she's required to do so, as is the case with any sick person. And so they're saying that in terms of the 9th of Av, the rules with respect to people who are excused from the fast are the same as they are with respect to Yom Kippur. And part of that same teaching was, and twilight on the 9th of Av, it is prohibited to eat or drink. And they likewise said so in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. So then the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Did Rabbi Yochanan actually say that? Didn't Rabbi Yochanan say the 9th of Av is not like a communal fast, decreed to pray for rain? So what? Isn't it referring to the matter of twilight? Apparently, Rabbi Yochanan holds that it is permitted to eat and drink during twilight on the 9th of Av. For sure not on Yom Kippur, but maybe it is permitted to eat and drink during twilight on the 9th of Av, since it's a rabbinic decree and not a biblical festival, a biblical, Day of Atonement, like the biblical Day of Atonement. The Gemara answers, no. It is referring to performing labor, which is prohibited on the 9th of Av, in contrast to other fasts. So when we have other fast days, let's say a public fast day that was decreed because of a drought and we're praying for rain, essentially, work is not going to be prohibited. They're not going to multiply the days on which people are prohibited to work in their professions. Now, our Mishna is discussing that with respect to the 9th of Av, some communities work, other communities prohibit work. So the ones that do prohibit work, do they prohibit work at twilight? It would appear not, because it's a rabbinically decreed fast day. We're not going to also observe the stringency of prohibiting that work during the twilight hour. And the Gemara expresses surprise at this. But is it referring to performing labor? We already learned explicitly in the Mishna. In a place where people were accustomed to perform labor on the 9th of Av, one performs labor. In a place where people were accustomed not to perform labor, one does not perform labor. So apparently the prohibition against performing labor on Tisha B'Av depends on local custom and is not an outright prohibition. And even Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel only said that one may conduct himself as a Torah scholar, because the sages said Torah scholars, yes, you refrain from working on Tisha B'Av. But other people, depends on local custom. And even Rabban Gamliel said that one may conduct himself like a Torah scholar and refrain from doing work on the 9th of Av, but it is not obligated to stop working. Because, and even Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel only said that one may conduct himself as a Torah scholar and refrain from performing labor. Why? Because when one sits and does not perform labor, it does not appear as presumptuousness on his part, right? May anyone conduct himself as a Torah scholar? Not if you're going to, by doing that, hold yourself out as a Torah scholar, right? You can conduct yourself like a Torah scholar for certain things, but you don't want to declare that you are a Torah scholar when indeed you're not. It would look presumptuous and could lead to people relying on you and your, what you say and how you act. And they might think you are a Torah scholar and come to imitate you. And since you're not a Torah scholar, you might make mistakes. And then other people in copying you would be led into error. So we want to avoid that situation. But refraining from work on Tisha B'Av is not going to, convince people, oh, that guy's not working. He must be a Torah scholar. Let's copy everything he does. Because people don't really notice when others are not working. It does not create the impression that he actually considers himself a Torah scholar, because others may simply think that he has no work to do. However, in terms of prohibiting the performance of labor, he does not prohibit performing labor on the 9th of Av. Right? So Shimon ben Gamliel says people may conduct themselves like Torah scholars and refrain from working, but he himself does not prohibit people from working. Now, what is the law on this subject? Let's just read the halacha with respect to labor on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. The prohibition against performing labor on the 9th of Av, especially labor that may be postponed, depends on local custom. In certain places, the custom is to prohibit labor, while in other places, it is not. It is customary for Torah scholars to refrain from performing labor, and any person may conduct himself like a Torah scholar in this regard, as stated in the Mishna by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So the Mishna is the law. That's the way it has come out. What is that? Okay. Sorry. Now, here's something interesting. So Rav Papa says, what is the meaning of the phrase, the 9th of Av is not like a communal fast? Now Rav Steinsaltz is going to give us in the elucidation how these communal fasts were conducted. And I'd like you to imagine that we were living in such a community, very much agriculturally dependent, right? It's not like they could import, if they had a local drought, they couldn't just count on food being imported from another country or another continent and there wouldn't be fear of starvation, right? Food didn't move around that quickly in the ancient world. So with a severe drought in the land, people were really afraid. And they came together as a community and prayed together that God would end the drought. Now picture how these communities were fasting. So Rav Papa said, what is the meaning of the phrase, the 9th of Av is not like a communal fast? It comes to teach a stringency. There are different types of communal fasts for rain. The first 3 fasts are the least stringent. The next 3 are more stringent, and the final 7 are the most stringent of all. Now, it's my memory, I could be wrong, but I think when they would do these series of fasts, they would do them Monday, Thursday, Monday. And then I guess they would start again Monday, Thursday, Monday, and then they would do 7. I'm not sure what schedule they were on. But these are a lot of fast days relatively close together. I mean, imagine a whole community afflicting itself by fasting. Now, I think these fast days would be daytime fasts. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's still a lot of fasting. And the statement teaches that the 9th of Av is not like the first fast days, which are more lenient in several respects. For example, they do not begin during twilight. Rather, it is like the final fast days when both eating and performing labor are prohibited during twilight. So by those final fast days, right, they're definitely 25-hour fasts. They include twilight. They include refraining from labor. It's like everybody is coming together and getting involved in these communal fast days. It's not just like, oh, well, you go to your synagogue, we'll go to ours, and you go to your church and we'll go to our synagogue, and, hey, let's all hope for the best. I mean, that whole community is involved, right? They are involved in those fast days. There's a great joke about a communal fast. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. I'm not going to tell it. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, now that we're talking about these fast days, and then in the Mishnah it said that in all places, Torah scholars are idle, right? A Torah scholar must refrain from working on Tisha B'Av, right? Because it would be unseemly for a Torah scholar to do anything but the most stringent version of observing Tisha B'Av. Why? What do we do on Tisha B'Av? We remember and mourn the destruction of the temple. Now, the average person knows that there was a time in history, there was a temple standing in Jerusalem, sacrifices were brought there, it was very beautiful, there was a lot of singing there, and those times are gone. That's and you really try to, through the fast of Tisha B'Av and reading Lamentations, you really try to get in that frame of mind where I personally feel the loss and I, cultivate that sadness, that longing, that mourning in myself. But a Torah scholar who spends so much time studying the laws of the temple and of the offerings and of the priests, and the processions that were there and the drawing of the water on Sukkot, etc. He has such a greater and more intimate, more, picturesque knowledge of what went on in the temple. He has to feel that loss so much more sharply because he's aware so much more of what was lost. And therefore, the sages say, if you're a Torah scholar, you're not working on Tisha B'Av. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said, it is appropriate for people to conduct themselves like Torah scholars on Tisha B'Av. And not just appropriate, one should conduct himself like a Torah scholar in this regard and refrain from performing labor. Now the Gemara asks, is that to say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that we are not concerned about presumptuousness when a person conducts himself like a Torah scholar? And conversely, do the rabbis hold that we are concerned about presumptuousness? Right? Because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says people should act like Torah scholars. By inference, then the rabbis don't hold that way, right? Torah scholars should refrain from work, but in a place where people do work on Tisha B'Av, people should work. That's what it seems to be saying in the Mishna. But didn't we hear them say the opposite? The rabbis said the opposite, that they are concerned about presumptuousness, or rather that they're not in this sense. And we learned in a Mishnah, with regard to the recitation of Shema on one's wedding night. So Shema is something that all Jews are obligated to say morning and evening, right? The fundamental declaration of God's oneness. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. That's the first line of the Shema prayer. We say that morning and evening. So, wait a minute, where am I? Or at least men are obligated. Aren't women obligated in the Shema also? Women are not obligated in time-bound positive commandments, but I think women are obligated in the Shema. Nina, let me know. I'll check the notes on that. I should know that offhand. Okay. So she'll let me know in 1 second. But with respect to a groom reciting the Shema on his wedding night, he's exempt, right? So a groom who's getting married is exempt from reciting the Shema on his wedding night. Nina's saying, pretty sure women are actually not obligated in the Shema. Okay, so that would make sense. So it's a certainly a time-bound positive commandment. So men are obligated, but a groom is not obligated on his wedding night. Okay. However, the rabbi said that if a groom wishes to recite the Shema on the first night, despite his exemption, he may do so. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, not everyone who wishes to assume the reputation of a God-fearing person may assume it, and consequently, not everyone who wishes to recite the Shema on his wedding night may do so. Their opinions in that Mishnah appear contrary to their opinions in the current Mishnah. Right? So the question at hand is it going to be considered presumptuous, let's say in a locality where the custom is to work on Tisha B'Av? The Torah scholars are going to refrain from labor because they're Torah scholars. The Mishnah said that's what they need to do. And a regular person, according to Shimon ben Gamliel, can refrain from work he can conduct himself like a Torah scholar and refrain from working on Tisha B'Av, the day of mourning for the destruction of the temples. So should we be concerned that this person will be deemed, will look like he's being presumptuous and acting like he's a Torah scholar, even though he's not a Torah scholar? So we look at this other situation that a groom is exempt from reciting the Shema on his wedding night. So the question is, but the sages say, but if he wishes to say the Shema, he can. Who is it that normally is allowed to say the Shema even on his wedding night? A Torah scholar. Rabbi Yochanan said, the attribution of the opinions is reversed in one of the sources. So because they seem to be saying opposite things in the Mishnah with respect to working on Tisha B'Av and the Mishnah with respect to who's exempt, a groom being exempt from saying the Shema on his wedding night, since the rabbis and Shimon ben Gamliel seem to come out in different places, Rabbi Yochanan says, well, one of the Mishnas was recorded in error. The opinion should be reversed. Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Idi, said, do not reverse either text, as it is possible to resolve the difficulty in another manner. The contradiction between the statement of the rabbis here and the statement of the rabbis there is not difficult. Lo kasha. Here, on the 9th of Av, since everyone is performing labor and he is not performing labor, his idleness is conspicuous and it appears like presumptuousness. However, there, in the case of reciting the Shema on one's wedding night, it does not appear like presumptuousness, as everyone is reciting the Shema and he is reciting it with them. He's not singling himself out. He should have been singled out because it's his wedding night, not other people's. But if he just does what everybody else is doing, it doesn't seem presumptuous. And similarly, the contradiction between the statement of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel and the statement of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, here with respect to Tisha B'Av and there with respect to a groom on his wedding night seems like a contradiction, but it isn't. There, in the case of reciting the Shema on one's wedding night, it is that we require concentration. This is why the groom is exempt. We require concentration, and it is clear to all that he is unable to concentrate because of his preoccupation with the mitzvah that he must perform. Therefore, right, so it's the groom. So the basic assumption is that neither the groom nor the bride have ever had marital relations in their life. They know that they're going to do that on their wedding night, and they're, verklempt. They're a little bit tense and preoccupied about it, and therefore he won't have the necessary power of concentration that he should be bringing when he's reciting the Shema. Now, what an important lesson that is. When we say the Shema, do we just run through it because it's one more page in the Siddur, one more page in the prayer book, and we're just going to recite it and move on? Or are we saying it with such a degree of concentration that if we were really preoccupied with, what's going to happen on the wedding night, that we would not be able to summon that degree of concentration, and that's why the groom is exempt. And it is clear to all that he is unable to concentrate because of his preoccupation with the mitzvah he must perform. Therefore, if he recites the Shema, it would appear like presumptuousness. It is as though he is announcing, I am able to concentrate, although others in my situation are not. However, here, by not performing labor on the 9th of Av, it does not appear like presumptuousness, as people can say, well, it must be he has no work to do, and that's why he's not working. I mean, there's a lot of people not working. It doesn't mean that that they've made a purposeful decision to refrain from work. It might just mean they have no work to do. And what is the law with respect to a groom reciting the Shema on his wedding night? A man who marries a virgin, as opposed to a widow or a divorcee, a man who marries a virgin is exempt from reciting Shema for 3 days after the wedding if he has not yet consummated the marriage. Once he consummates the marriage, his obligation to say the Shema returns. Some authorities rule that one may not opt to recite Shema, right? So it would be too presumptuous to think that he does not have this difficulty concentrating. And so he can't recite the Shema. He's not even permitted to. On his wedding night, he's prohibited to recite the Shema. That's just some opinions. Other commentaries rule, for a variety of reasons, that a groom does recite Shema, and it is not presumptuous on his part. That's the Rif, Rambam, and the Rosh. Nowadays, when people are unable to concentrate properly when reciting Shema, even under normal circumstances, a groom does recite the Shema. Indeed, one who does not do so is guilty of presumptuousness, right? So it's changed that much. Our ancestors, thousands of years ago, took the obligation to recite the Shema so seriously that they would just stop everything, get in the zone, and get to a place of absolute concentration They wouldn't just say the words, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." They would try to experience those words. And for some reason, we've come so far down in our level of spirituality that, the common practice is it's just a dry recital, and it would actually be deemed presumptuous to say, I'm not going to recite that on my wedding night because I can't summon the proper level of concentration. I think we can learn from this that we could all do better when we say the Shema. Get at least more focused and more concentrated than the average person gets in the age in which we live. Next Mishnah, the fifth Mishnah, here in chapter 4. Apropos the discussion of performing labor on Passover Eve, right? So the 14th of Nisan, that whole day before Passover begins that night on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nisan. There are differences in other customs. As the rabbis say, in Judea, people would perform labor on Passover Eves until midday, right? So we talked about this before. That's what this chapter is all about. That with respect to working on the day before Passover begins that night, for sure, from midday on, the rabbis decreed nobody can work. But there are differences in local custom of can you work that morning, right? That morning before noon on the day before Passover begins. And the rabbis say, in Judea, people would perform labor until midday. And in the Galilee, people would not perform labor. So we saw that, so far we've only been told that there's a difference in local customs. Now they're spelling it out a little bit. In Judea, they do work until midday. In the Galilee, they don't. Okay. And it says, and in Galilee, the people would not perform labor on Erev Passover at all. Now does that mean that they don't perform it that morning, as opposed to the people of Judea who do work that morning? Or does it mean they don't even work from the night before, right? The 24 hours before Passover begins, on the night of the 14th, do they stop working even then? With regard to performing labor on the night before Passover Eve, the night between the 13th and the 14th of Nisan, Beit Shammai, the followers of Shammai, prohibit performing labor, and Beis Hillel permit doing so until sunrise. So that is different. That's not about custom. That was a difference in understanding of law between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai said you stop working altogether for 24 hours essentially before Passover begins. Beis Hillel said you could work during that night, and then that next morning, there's going to be difference in customs, whether you could work during that morning or not. But certainly it was permitted to work during that night, the night of the 14th. The Gemara comments. The Gemara asks with regard to the Mishnah. Initially, at the beginning of the chapter, beginning of this chapter 4, the Tana, the rabbi of the Mishnah, taught that in certain places, there is merely a custom not to perform labor. And yet, ultimately, in this Mishnah, he taught that according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, it is prohibited to perform labor that whole 24 hours. Apparently, performance of labor is not dependent on custom, but is actually prohibited, at least according to the opinion of Beis Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan said, this is not difficult, lo kasha, la kasha. Since that first Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, and this current Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Right? As we've seen, the sages of the Talmud are by no means some kind of monolithic block where they all agree and all the law is the same. So we can even have Mishnahs that contradict each other because one is authored by one sage and another is authored by another sage. That's why even when we read a Mishnah, it's not going to be necessarily the law. And that's why we have to consult where did the law end up, right? Because now the law has been codified, but it wasn't necessarily codified at that time. And so as it was taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yehuda said, in Judea, they would perform labor on the 14th of Nisan until midday. And in the Galilee, they would not perform labor at all. Rabbi Meir said to Rabbi Yehuda, what proof do you cite from Judea and the Galilee to this discussion? Rather, in a place where people were accustomed to perform labor, one performs labor. And in a place where people were accustomed not to perform labor, one does not perform labor. And the Gemara analyzes this baraisa. From the fact that Rabbi Meir is speaking about custom, by inference, Rabbi Yehuda is speaking about a prohibition against performing labor in the Galilee. Right, so they're having a discussion. Is this actually a difference in custom from one locality to another? Or actually, is it a difference in whether it's prohibited according to Beis Shammai or permitted according to Beis Hillel? What is the nature of this discrepancy that some people refrain from work for that whole period and others work, and in other places they do work and some don't? Now, there's a good note here from Rav Steinsaltz. Some commentaries explain that according to Rabbi Meir, there is no disagreement between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai because there cannot be a dispute with regard to local custom. That's not a dispute between the sages. That's, a difference in local custom. Rather, each one ascertains the local customs and acts accordingly. So maybe Beis Shammai were based in a different place than Beis Hillel were. They lived in a different place. Others explain that according to Beis Hillel, if there is a local custom to refrain from working on the night of the 14th, it is a custom based on error and should be abandoned, right? So there are some customs that arose but were based on error. They didn't have a legitimate basis. In that case, maybe a sage should come, examine the situation, make a public announcement, and re-educate that community. Maybe. Alternatively, the disagreement between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is with regard to the status of the day and the night. Beis Shammai consider that the prohibition of working at night is part of the general prohibition against working during the day. If you're going to say that you can't work during the day of the 14th, that would include the night also. Beis Hillel distinguish between the night and the day. As we know, there are minor fasts where we fast during the day. We don't fast the night before. And there are major fasts where we fast for that whole 24 hours. It's called major because it includes the night. So Beis Hillel says there's a distinction between the day and the night. And it's perfectly appropriate to say we can work during the night, but we cannot work once it becomes daytime. Therefore, in their opinion, any activity that is prohibited during the day is also prohibited the night before. However, Beis Hillel likened Passover Eve to a fast day in that the night and the day are considered two separate entities. That's as much as I'm going to say about the discussion of the fifth Mishnah, because we're a little bit short on time. I'm only going to just introduce now the sixth Mishnah. It also is a short Mishnah and has a short discussion. In this case, I'm going to read you the Mishnah, and then I'm going to tell you where the law came out, and then I'm coming to questions and comments. So if you've got questions and comments, put them in the comments now. We are almost done. Rabbi Meir says, and let me adjust here. Rabbi Meir says, with regard to any labor that one began before the 14th of Nisan, he may complete it on the 14th before midday. However, one may not begin to perform that labor from the outset of the 14th, even if he is able to complete it before midday. Right, so all agree, no working on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. Right? Passover begins that night, the 15th of Nisan. From midday on, no labor is permitted. In the morning, some communities work, some communities don't. But if you've got a labor, like for instance, you're creating a pair of shoes, if you can finish that labor before noon, you've started sometime before the 14th, if you could finish it, okay, so do that work, finish the pair of shoes. But you can't start production of a new pair of shoes, even if you could finish it before midday. You shouldn't be beginning new labors. So here they're making a distinction, not just work generally, but work that completes something you already started, okay, finish it. But don't start a new job, even if it's a small job that could be begun and completed before midday, inappropriate, according to this Mishnah. And the rabbis say, that was according to Rabbi Meir, the rabbis say The practitioners of only 3 crafts are permitted to perform labor until midday on the 14th of Nisan, Erev Pesach. And they are tailors, barbers, and launderers. Tailors, barbers, and launderers. Can you guess what is particular, what is special about tailors, barbers, and launderers? The ones who make the clothes, the ones who wash the clothes, and the ones who groom us, get us ready. Get us ready is the point. We're getting ready for the festival of Passover. We want to look our best. It is definitely considered an obligation and praiseworthy to dress up for Shabbos or for any festival, to put on your finest, to be prepared. Why? Because when we're observing a festival or when we're observing Shabbos, it's like, we're more conscious. We're always inside God. We're always in the presence of God. But we're more conscious of being in the presence of God during Shabbos and festivals. And just as you wouldn't go meet the Queen of England, in your regular schlubby everyday clothes, you dress up. You want to get ready to be, at least you're more conscious of being in the presence of the Lord. And so therefore, the only ones who are permitted to work that morning, according to the rabbis, are tailors, barbers, and launderers, whose work is needed for the festival. Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda says even shoemakers are permitted to work on the 14th. Now note, this is not, and was it Sharon who made that point the other day? Well, what about the women and anybody else who's in the kitchen, getting the meal together? Aren't they working? Well, yeah, that is work. That is permitted. That's permitted even during the festival, as opposed to this other kind of work that would not be permitted during the festival. But right, because cooking is permitted on a festival day, so that's why it's a different category. These are the kinds of labor that are definitely prohibited during the festival. Should be, basically saying other kinds of labor like this, if it's not related to getting ready for the festival, you shouldn't be doing it on the morning of the 14th. But if it is helping you get ready for the festival, even though it's prohibited on the festival, that's going to be permitted on the morning of. And what is the halacha? What is the law? Labor on Erev Pesach. Even in a community where the custom is to perform labor on Erev Pesach, right, on the day before Passover begins, only tailors, barbers, and people who wash clothes may initiate new tasks, right? Everyone else, okay, complete your work. We understand you could do that, but don't start something new. Why? If you start something new, you might come to work later and work past that midday deadline, right? If you're only thinking about completing, then you have in mind, I need to complete this before noon. If you're starting something new, you might easily come to transgress that prohibition. And this is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis in the Mishna. Some authorities teach that these types of labor may be performed even in a place where the custom is not to perform labor on Erev Pesach. That's the Rima citing the Rosh. With regard to other types of labor, if the task was initiated the day before, it may be completed on the 14th of Nisan before midday, as long as it is for the purpose of the festival. All right, that's what I've got for us today. Let us examine your questions and comments. Quick note, so starting tomorrow, we mentioned that it might start on Sunday, but actually tomorrow, Nina is going to do the Motzi Shabbos show. Instead of AT Daily, it's going to be Nina, and she's going to be teaching about character refinement and Jewish ethics, drawing from the teachings and wisdom of Rabbi Avigdor Miller. This is going to be an amazing class, an amazing talk. You really don't want to miss that. So that's going to be tomorrow night after Shabbos. And then she's going to do it again on Sunday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Right after Shabbos, it's usually 1 to 2 hours after Shabbos ends here in Los Angeles. So probably about 7 o'clock-ish. We never commit to an exact time on Saturday nights. But then she'll be going at about 6 p.m. on Sunday. And then perhaps if there's popular acclaim, she might go Monday as well. There won't be AT daily starting tomorrow night until probably next Friday or possibly Motzi Shabbos next Saturday night, because I'm taking the kids for a little dad and kids time in the mountains. Nina's going to mind the fort at home, and so she's going to teach at least a couple of classes. Okay, Tom Beck says, wasn't Tanis Esther a communal fast? Exactly, right? The fast of Esther that she asked people to decree in the book of Esther, because why? So there was the wicked Haman had prevailed on the king Ahasuerus to allow him to decree that all the Jews would be destroyed throughout, the biggest kingdom in the world. So her uncle Mordecai said to Esther, you have to, beseech the king to stop that. And for her to approach the king when she hadn't been summoned was to risk her life. But he said, it was for this moment, perhaps, that you were put in this position to be the queen. And she did it, but she asked the whole community to be with her. And so she, as a leader of the Jewish community, and then with the help of her uncle Mordecai, decreed a fast on the whole Jewish community, at least everyone who got the word in time, certainly around Shushan, the capital of that Persian Empire. And they did it, right? They did it. They did that fast. And so they were really all, pulling together in the same direction. And that was a tremendous source of support to Esther when she risked her life and approached the king. Christo. That's what I love about rabbinical texts. Disagreements are a good thing, and all opinions are recorded. Exactly. I mean, anyone who's been following this class for a while knows the sages disagree with each other, and they record the minority opinions. Krista also says, thank you so much for your time again. Some of this went over my head, so I will be watching the recording and reviewing before Shabbos starts. Looking forward to tomorrow night's episode of Learning. And finally, Carolyn says, so if you were visiting there, which would you do? I.e. the place where the custom might have been incorrect. Seems like we learned a couple of days ago about whether or not one could or should adopt the custom of where they are visiting if it differs from their local custom, like in Jerusalem versus outside Jerusalem. I mean, certainly, right? First of all, it's a difference whether a sage visits a place with a different custom where he's from, or just an average person, right? So the average person, you're not going to challenge their customs, and basically the sages said you should adopt the stringencies of both places. So if it's your custom not to work and you go to a place where they do work on the morning before Passover begins, so you shouldn't work, is it going to seem presumptuous? And as we saw, no, because nobody's going to really notice that you're not working. This other question about if you go to a place and you see a custom that they've developed, which was based on an error, right? So that's not for the average person to deal with at all. Is it for a sage? If a Torah scholar goes to such a place, should he inform them that they are in error? And as we've seen, the sages were very light touch about that. Generally speaking, no, because what you'll end up doing is create a machlokes. You'll create a dispute in that community where people are accustomed to what they're accustomed to. I shared a quote from the Rambam, from Maimonides today, which basically says that the truth is the truth, and the truth does not become more true just because everybody accepts it as the truth, nor does it become less true because everybody does not accept that that is the truth. The truth is the truth. While I was researching that comment, there was another one that said that people like to believe what they are accustomed to. If that's what they grew up around, it becomes the truth for them. And no amount of logic and convincing will move them from the customs that they've been used to all their days. Yeah, occasionally you can change a custom, but it is definitely, dangerous territory. Customs that have become widely adopted within a community and everyone accepts it as, the law. Of course, there was a time when everybody believed the earth was flat. Turned out that they were mistaken. So that's why both of these principles are true. The truth is the truth. But a truth that's universally accepted in a place, you better have a very light touch before you're going to come to challenge that community in the ways that it's accustomed to. Sometimes it's necessary, but it takes a tremendous amount of wisdom and tact and strength to challenge that kind of prevailing orthodoxy in a community. So obviously there's no hard and fast rule about how to address a situation where a large number of people are wallowing in error. It's a case-by-case basis. Okay, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. You should have such a sweet Shabbos. It should be amazing for you. Blessings should rain down from heaven on you and all your loved ones. We say amen.